Welcome, everybody. Thank you very much for joining this latest in Mills and Reeve's in-house in Focus program. I'm your chair today. My name's Alex Newman. I say I'm the chair. It's a very grand way of introducing my role, which is essentially to do some introductions, say hello, talk you through, I'm afraid, the obligatory housekeeping, which I'm sure most of you have heard many, many times before, and then help out with the Q&A towards the end. Our session topic today, as you'll see on the screen in front of you, is top tips and bear traps in relation to software and SaaS licensing. In a moment, I will introduce you to David Hall, who's going to present the session today. But for now, I'm afraid those are housekeeping points. So firstly, just so you're all aware, we are recording the session today. That's so we can make the session available to everybody afterwards, including those who have joined today, and obviously those who haven't been able to join. That will be available via the Mills and Reeve website and via link to our YouTube channel. We won't be recording, or certainly won't be making available publicly, any of your contributions. So I'll come on to talk about Q&A. If you ask a question, we won't be specifically covering that, or certainly won't be attributing questions or answers to any particular person or business, so don't worry about that. Q&A, importantly, we will be taking questions towards the end of the session. Sometimes people prefer to ask questions as we go along. We're deciding not to do that today because it does kind of interfere with the timing of the presentation, particularly when we have limited time. So what we'd ask you to do, please, if you do have any questions for David, if you can type them into the Q&A box using the Q&A button at the bottom of the screen, that's the way that we will see them. Please don't use the chat function because that has been disabled. It's just the panelists who have access to that today. So please do use the Q&A box, or the Q&A function instead. At the end of the session, we'd be really grateful for any feedback you can provide. It's massively important to us to know how we've done in relation to this session. And also, if you can, please do provide us with suggestions of topics which you would like us to cover in future sessions. Really helps us to plan and prepare a program of sessions which is relevant to you and which you're interested in hearing about. So please do take the opportunity to tell us what you would like to hear about. Now, without further ado, I've babbled on for long enough, so I will introduce you to my colleague, David Hall. Now, David is a vastly experienced and knowledgeable technology lawyer. He advises buyers and suppliers in relation to all aspects of technology procurement and delivery. When I was reading through David's list of credentials in preparation for this session, I realized that I don't understand half of what he does, or what it means. So I'm going to be learning an awful lot in this session. I hope you do too. I'm sure you'll find it very useful. Without further ado, I'll hand over to David. David.
Thank you very much. And yes, you can all see the grey hairs that attest to 20 years in the profession. All of them spent advising on technology. And thank you for the kind intro. Let's get straight into it. So we're talking about bear traps concerning software and SaaS licensing. And this session today is particularly aimed at buyers and users of software and SaaS being software as a service. If you're a supplier, don't go away, stay with us, just go into buying mode. So as you can see from the first slide that we have up on the screen, BT1, that's bear trap number 1. What we're doing in this session is headlining the bear traps. And I've got 7 of those bear traps for you, all tightly focused on the question of what should we be worrying about when we have a software or SaaS license or procurement in front of us. What about the tips? You might be thinking, give me my tips. Well, throughout the session, I'm going to be exemplifying methods that I use in practice and have developed over the years. And I'm going to be signposting much of the commercial context that it's really important to understand when you're dealing with software and SaaS licensing and contracts. Those are your tips. So straight in, BT1, bear trap 1. The bear trap is getting mixed up between software and SaaS. Why is this important? Why is it a thing? Well, it's because when you get into dealing with the legals, dealing with the license document itself and the contract for supply, there's a really big difference between what the software license and the SaaS agreement look like, or certainly what they should look like. Now, I'm not going to do a tired chalk and talk. Almost all of you will have access to PLC or similar resources. So if you're not currently familiar with the look and feel of a software license versus a SaaS agreement, I would suggest that's your step one and take that away with you. I'm assuming that level of knowledge. It's important for you to know which one you're dealing with before you get into it, because the output, the contractual output looks so different. If we turn back to the subject matter, though, it can actually be really difficult to decide which one you're dealing with. How do you tell the difference? Well, the first slide here gives you a start for 10 set of concepts that you can use to differentiate. Start on the left with me. So we have a little diagram within a green box, a green round-edged box, and that box stands for your corporate network, the part of your computer systems and network that is under the control of your organization, whether it's actually owned by you or provided for you by your suppliers is kind of immaterial. It's under your control. Look at where the green box is. So the hand holding what looks like an iPhone, I guess it could be Android or some other make, is within the corporate network. The user's device is within the corporate network. And there is a connection, the purple arrow or pink arrow, directly to the computer terminal, which signifies our server or the part of the corporate network that is running our software. This diagram on the left is describing conventional software. It all exists and operates, all of its components exist and operate within the corporate network. Move with me to the right. That is describing a pure SaaS setup, software as a service setup. Look at where the green line is, the boundary of your corporate network. It only exists around the user's device. And then we have a lightning symbol, which is the conventional way of describing the internet. We access the SaaS via the internet, and the SaaS is outside of our corporate network. It's on a network that is controlled by your SaaS supplier. The SaaS is already turned on before you start using it. It exists. It has been installed, stood up, and implemented. You join the SaaS from outside of the supplier's network, from outside of the computing devices that provide the SaaS for you, and you join via the internet. So that's pretty clear, isn't it? What's the problem, you may be thinking at this point? How do they get mixed up? Well, it's because of modern trends that I'm increasingly seeing in the way that particularly SaaS is delivered. I've described a pure SaaS setup where there are two different networks, the network that the SaaS is operating on and your corporate network. SaaS isn't always provided like that now. Sometimes all of the files, the databases, the content, and the software programs that produce the SaaS are available for you to download from the supplier of the SaaS. And you can download and install that SaaS onto your own corporate network. That should be sounding to you an awful lot like what we've described in the left-hand side of the slide, because it is. What I've just described there might look and feel like SaaS to the user once it's been installed and implemented, but the supply that your supplier is making to you there is of software. And you would want to contract with that software on a software license and supply terms and conditions. It would be inappropriate for you to treat it as being SaaS. You're not receiving a service. you're receiving software, and it's a technical product that requires the support that a well-built software license should include. There are some other grey areas as well as technology advances. So it's now possible for conventional software to be commoditized or placed within technical wrappers that make it possible for the software to be provided to you very quickly and conveniently, and so that you can access it via the internet as quickly and easily as you would access SaaS. What is that, you might be thinking? Well, I'll leave that question hanging, and if you're interested, if you've encountered that kind of containerized software that is delivered using virtual network connections or containers produced with technology like Citrix or Docker or Kubernetes, then ask a question and we'll circle back around to that. But you can see now, I hope, that although pure SaaS and software are very clear and independent concepts, in practice, the supply that you get can be somewhere within the grey area, and you need to know what you're buying so that you contract properly for it. That's bear trap number one. Bear trap number two now, missing components. So imagine you buy a car, but when it's delivered, the doors are missing. How can that happen? It's absurd in real life, and unless your car purchase was made via the internet and was maybe a bleary-eyed, alcohol-fueled late-night purchase via eBay, which I'm sure many people can attest to. It's really, really easy to do with software, and to an extent with software as a service. The slide is a little bit busy, but what I've provided for you here is actually a simple and quite rich resource or set of concepts that should really help you to make sure that you're not missing components. The risk being that you work out you need the component later on, and you have an awkward moment where you have to stretch the budget, and you have a follow-on nuisance implementation where you've got to implement additional components to make your solution work. What's the relevance of this for in-house legal advisors? Well, you're going to be supporting and working with your internal and external stakeholders, your IT team, your user group, your external partner organizations that want to integrate with your new solution. They're the ones that should be preparing the tender, and the crown jewel in the tender, which is the specification of requirements, what you want your software or SaaS provider to deliver. How do you check on them? How do you check for those gaps in the specification, which is their subject matter expertise, not yours? And how do you make sure that you've got comprehensive instructions so that you can build the terms and conditions or commission the right contract? The stack is your answer. And I've given you an example of an imaginary technology stack as your resource on the slide. Software and software as a service is built up of layers of technology, and the stack is the layers. So come with me into the slide, and I'll guide you through the layers. And where I'm going to take you first of all is over on the right-hand side of the slide, and we're looking at the three headline areas that I've drawn out. Those are how you can access the stack concept in a nice, simple way. So let's start at the bottom, hardware. Your software or your SaaS can only run if there is some hardware. You need a computing device somewhere in the world in order to stand up your software, to install it and implement it on, or for your software as a service to be running on. No hardware, it won't work. There's nothing for it to operate on. Dependencies. This is about other software products, and it's particularly relevant if you're buying software, much less relevant if you're buying SaaS. This is about the layers of additional software products that your feature application requires in order for it to run. A database application, for example, an application that your feature software can talk to in order to store and retrieve data. And finally, the feature software. So let's go back down to the hardware layer and have a think about that. If you're using the stack as a guide in order to check for missing components, what you should be thinking about in the hardware layer, whether you're buying software or SaaS, is location and providers. Do I know who ultimately is providing the hardware? It might be real physical hardware, it might be hardware as a service or infrastructure as a service that you're renting from the likes of Amazon or Microsoft Azure. Do you know who it is? And are you clear about what the terms and conditions are? Where is it in the world? Data protection implications here, and potentially licensing territorial implications as well. And crucially, what's it going to cost? Whether you're buying software, where you really need to know everything about the hardware that you're going to run your software on, or you're buying SaaS, where the hardware may not be put on the front and in the foreground by your SaaS provider, you need to understand what it's going to cost. So your software or SaaS license should be based on a firm understanding of where your hardware is coming from and what it's going to cost you, because one way or another, it's going to cost you to buy that hardware and maintain it, or to pay for the infrastructure as a service, which is often charged based on usage. If you haven't pinned those charges, then you haven't pinned down the full cost of the license or SaaS that you're buying. You've got a missing component and a resulting missing cost risk. What about the dependencies? Well, if you don't know that you need a database application for your software, then you might get a good way down the implementation project for setting up your software, and all of a sudden you and the supplier scratch your heads and say, oh, who's got the database application then? And is it available for us to install? And the answer, if it's a missing component, will be nobody's got the database software, and we're going to have to go out and buy it hurriedly on the back foot at extra unplanned, unbudgeted cost, and then implement it. An item of implementation that hasn't been taken account of in the implementation plan. It's a headache. We've got to find these missing components. Why am I raising this as a bear trap? It's because so often I find that the buyer's attention is focused on this top layer, feature software. It's the new shiny bit. And the buyer forgets to look down below for the dependencies and the hardware. And they also forget to look above. So just look for a moment in the left-hand part of the table, the more detailed part of it. I've put feature software application in bold, and it's the bottom layer. It's one of 3 items. But we're also thinking about integrations and changes that your software or SaaS provider is able to support as standard out of the box. And in addition, integrations or changes to the standard software or SaaS that are maybe bespoke, that your software or SaaS provider has not provided before and need to be built or developed from scratch. We need to look above the line, don't we? And again, this comes down to managing your stakeholders and being really clear with them and interrogating them about whether their tendered specification includes all of the components. Missing components, implementation risk and cost. Bear trap 3, service level agreement. You may be thinking, Val, David, play by the rules. This is a session on software and SaaS licensing, you fool. Can we come back to licensing, please, and not talk about service levels and maintenance? That's the bear trap. My message to you and my encouragement is start thinking about license and SLA. don't think about license in isolation. Don't neglect it. In Bear Trap 3, we're just going to focus on software because software and SaaS are very different use cases. So what about software? Well, commercially, the license for the software is a permission to use it, or more specifically, it's a permission normally to use the underlying intellectual property rights. What's the service level agreement doing? It's not giving a permission. It's the set of terms and conditions or service specifications that determine whether or not that software is even going to be working on the day when you need it. And if it's not working, it's the terms and conditions and the service specification that and service levels that determine how fast it's going to be fixed. Your license, carefully crafted, is a pretty Pyrrhic legal contractual victory for you if you don't have the contractual underpinnings to make sure that the technology is going to be available. That's why this is a bear trap. We shouldn't just think in terms of licensing. We should think in terms of making sure that the technology is available and recoverable, as well as making sure that we have lawful permission to use it. There's also a commercial imperative. What's the cost, relatively, of the license compared to the service level agreement? Well, I'm sorry, I haven't carried out a detailed statistical analysis or even indeed a survey. There may be some merit in doing so. I'm going to give you a 20-year-old practitioner's thumbnail sketch. My experience suggests that a license is normally about, call it a 5-year plan that you have for deploying your software technology. Your license is probably going to be 10% of the total aggregate cost over 5 years. Your SLA is probably going to be 70 to 80% of the 5-year cost. If you neglect your SLA, you're neglecting up to typically 80% of the value that of the investment that you're pushing into the software. Where does that figure come from? Well, let's think of SAP, the provider of enterprise resource planning software, as an example. They charge the license fee, and then their baseline service level agreement is normally charged at something around 20% of the license fee, and will run for X number of years, say 5 years. 20% is quite a good rule of thumb. So hopefully I brought you in. Bear trap number 3, David, we're with you. License and service level agreement. So what about service level agreement? The fact that it is rarely talked about has had a knock-on effect. SLA crafting is now a bit of a dark art. There are lots of practitioners that don't touch it or don't feel confident about it. So what I've tried to do in the slide is to give you a handy resource. It's bare bones, isn't it? But it's giving you the headings, key points that you should be considering for structuring your software SLA, and for checking whether your internal and external stakeholders have thought about everything when they're giving you instructions about the SLA. So what are the headline operational and commercial points? Number 1, you want contractual assurance about availability. You might be hosting and running the software yourself, but you want to be assured that the supplier is confident in its own software and it considers that the software is generally going to be available. A typical service level that I would go for software, 99.9%. It's a rule of thumb, or a start for 10. 99.9% of what? And by the way, that's often referred to as 3 nines, 99.9. 99.9% of what? Typically, the measurement period is a month, and what we are measuring is minutes in the month. We want the software to be available for 99% of minutes available in a given month, month in, month out, for the entire operating term of the software. It's availability. Monitoring. The point is just to think about this. Many service level agreements deal with the next bullet points, incident management, which is, okay, the software has stopped working. what are the supplier's obligations for jumping high and fixing it, and how quickly will it fix? Monitoring is often automated, and the automation checks up routinely every minute, possibly every few seconds, to see if the software is still operational. Ping, operating. Ping, is there a response? Yes. Ping, is there a response? No. An alert is sent out if there is no response from the software, and that triggers incident management. Your monitoring is crucial. It's one of the fastest ways to detect when the software is going down, and it's one of the most effective ways of detecting those difficult incidents that users might not notice, such as a security breach. Not all security breaches can be detected from monitoring, but it's a good idea to have the word monitoring on your SLA radar. Incident management, I've introduced. What's problem management? Well, that's one layer down. If the software stops working, then there will be a root cause to that. And problem management is the supplier's obligation to find those root causes and then resolve them. The idea being, if we find the root cause and resolve it, it's not going to be producing any more incidents. So we try not just to heal the incident, we also go looking for the cause and fix that too. A quick steer on service levels. For incident management, we normally take a prioritized approach. Top priority, secondary priority, and then everything else. For top priority, I would expect the supplier to achieve a workaround or fix within 4 hours. That's the market norm. For the secondary priority, I would expect the supplier to provide a workaround or a fix within 8 hours. Anything else, really, it's about thinking about the practicalities. So if your incident is a service request or a change to the functionality of the software, you might need a number of days or even weeks. So it's about just working through that workflow to define an appropriate service level. Moving down on the slide, reactive maintenance and planned maintenance. Reactive maintenance flows directly from incident and problem management. Sometimes the incident will be addressed just by a workaround. So what you might be told to do by your supplier is just roll back to the previous version of the software, because that's still working, it's still stable, and then the supplier can look at the latest version of the software and find a permanent fix for it. What we're looking for in the reactive maintenance are those permanent fixes, and the supplier needs to have an obligation to apply them at regular intervals. The contract should define a maintenance window, which is the regular window, weekly, fortnightly, typically, when those fixes should be applied, supplied for you to install, or applied by the supplier if that's the service that they're providing. And that's the planned maintenance piece. With software, you will often ask the supplier to maintain the stack, the database application, for example, or the operating system that is operating on the hardware. So those are matters to keep on your radar for the planned maintenance slot as well. Supplier to install the latest releases that have been issued by the third-party suppliers of those third-party applications. Next, Bear Trap 4. Cry foul again, because I'm still on service levels, but this time I want to take you through the implications for SaaS. So we're leaving software behind, and now we're thinking about SaaS. The whole commercial model with SaaS is different. I know I'm talking about pure SaaS here, not any of those grey areas that I introduced you to. Typically, pure SaaS is billed on a monthly or per annum service or subscription fee. Why is that? Well, there's a daily cost for your supplier. They're going to be paying daily for the hosting and the infrastructure that the SaaS runs on and the usage of that infrastructure. And they're going to be paying daily for the development team to develop their daily builds of the SaaS to keep it sweet and keep it operational. The subscription fee that you pay monthly or yearly covers all of that cost, but it also has rolled up within it normally. Sometimes it's split out, but normally as a rolled up item, you also have support. So once again, coming to my headline bear trap, in the context of SaaS, now that you've heard the commercial underpinnings, how can we possibly contemplate dealing with a SaaS license without also dealing with the SLA? They're inextricably linked. We must deal with SLA as part of the SaaS license. And just to underline that point, look at how much simpler the model is for a software as a service SLA. You've got 3 simple items: availability, incident management, problem management. That's it. We want the SaaS to be available when our users need it. That's really all that we want. The software, in this case, is provided as a service. When we turn it on, we want it to be there. We're not looking with SaaS at any more detail about what's underneath in the stack. We're not interested in maintenance. That's for the SaaS supplier to worry about. We make it their worry by imposing the availability service level on them. So if you receive a SaaS contract and you don't see detailed provisions for a maintenance service, don't necessarily cry foul with your supplier. This is typically how SaaS is contracted. Look at the availability metric that I've suggested for you though. 3 nines at the bottom, but I've given you a range, goes all the way up to 5 nines, 99.999% of minutes in a month. If you get 5 nines, literally that service level will only tolerate about 10 minutes, 10 to 15 minutes and a few seconds of downtime per month. It's very testing on the supplier. How can we possibly reasonably expect that? Well, think about what SaaS is. It's hosted by the supplier. It's the supplier's product hosted by or for the supplier. And there's only one copy of it in the world, in the simplest case. It's all at the supplier's fingertips. It has every opportunity to make sure that the SaaS is well maintained, and it should have the SaaS under close supervision. And it should have a team right there that is ready to leap onto the single product SaaS and single hosting environment in order to fix it if it goes down. That's why it's reasonable. It's so much easier than the supplier being called out to several hundred different customers and their different implementations of more conventional software. I've talked about maintenance being generally not relevant for SaaS licensing. Honestly, there are exceptions, and I would say if you are looking at buying SaaS for highly business critical applications, or where the data within the SaaS needs to be kept particularly secure, in those circumstances, you actually should consider looking underneath the bonnet of the SaaS and asking the supplier for some maintenance obligations. Who guards the guard is the logic there. Bear trap number 5, updates. The bear trap is failing to consider upgrades as part of your commercial and legal thinking when you're negotiating the license. And the position is slightly different, or the factors and risks are slightly different depending on whether you're dealing with software or SaaS. So I'm going to start with software and I'll tail end with SaaS. There are 2 things to consider when you're thinking about upgrades with software. The first one is the release schedule, and the second one is the support schedule for the software. So what am I getting at there? The release schedule is about the new releases of the software that the supplier is going to provide for you to install. So you're hopefully very familiar with the typical version control that is applied to software, and I've given you an example on the slide. We're working with the example 10.2. Major release, 10. Minor release, 2. Normally, when you buy software, conventional software, what you're buying is the major release, and the minor releases, 2, are included. You need to know the timing, the date or the year when the supplier is planning to move to the next major release, in this case, release 11. Because your migration to version 11 would not normally be included in the price that you pay under your license agreement. There are exceptions to that, and just stay with me and I will explain what they are. It's commercial. It's about seeing the cost coming down the road, because at this point you might be thinking, well, okay, version 11 comes along, but I don't have to move to it, do I? So I know that there's a cost there that I'm going to have to pay more to move to version 11, but I can hold off that cost, can't I? Not necessarily. And that's where the support schedule comes in. Suppliers have to invest in software, and they plan to invest for a limited period of time, normally counted in years. Once they have stopped, the point in time will come when they stop providing minor releases. Once they've moved, in this example, to version 11, they will stop providing proactive minor releases for version 10, but they will leave version 10 in support. And what that means is, if there is a critical problem with the software, it stops working for some reason, perhaps because of one of its dependencies, the third-party software it relies on, or perhaps because of a security vulnerability that has become visible, only in those circumstances will they provide an emergency or critical release. But the time comes when they're not even going to do that. That time is the end of the support schedule. At that point, you are faced with two bleak prospects. You're either forced to move to version 11, in this case, or you're stuck using software that is unsupported, might stop working at any moment, and is likely to be developing vulnerabilities. So the bear trap is, or the answer to the bear trap is, find out the release and support schedules from your supplier and make sure that you factor in the supplier's release and support schedules with your own timescales for and investment timescales for the software that you've purchased. If there's a clash between the supplier's timescales and your timescales, negotiate a plan, a cost-effective plan, so that you get the software that you need at a good price. What about SaaS? Moving on to SaaS. Well, the classic comment about SaaS is there are no upgrades. There's one copy of the SaaS, you access it, it's always up to date. That's not necessarily quite true. SaaS is increasingly modular, and the provider will develop new features as modules, and the modules are normally extra cost. The supplier will always have a plan of the new features and modules that it's intending to bring out, and it will often refer to that plan as being its backlog or its critical path of development plan. Ask your SaaS supplier for that plan, because that's how you can see what's coming down the road and make sure that your license or the SaaS supply agreement entitles you to the modules that you need. Moving quickly on, because I'm quite short of time now. Bear trap 6, security. I've given you a word tree, and I'm not going to dwell on it because you're going to be able to receive the slides, so you will have the word tree as a resource to consult after this workshop. But what it is doing is recording for you a concise model of the different factors that affect security or have a bearing on security. The jurisdiction where you're using the software or where the hardware is located or your users are located, premises, device security, network security, etc., all the way up to the top, people, the security risk being social engineering. The bear trap is ignoring security or undercooking it. It's a really technical topic. I mean, that's a lot of factors that I've put on screen for you, all of which have a bearing on security. Don't fall into that bear trap. It's a difficult, complicated, knotty topic. Don't neglect it because of that. Get advice and be proactive around security. You see the items that I've put a pink asterisk against. Those are the security factors that were relevant in a recent ransomware attack that came to my attention. The ransomware attack started with people. The exploit started with a weak password. The attacker was able to access a user account. From there, they were able to access a vulnerability that was known but hadn't been closed within the technology supplier's network. That enabled the attacker to gain privileged technical access to the technology supplier's network and to traverse across the servers, attacking the applications and the databases held on those servers. You can see how all of these factors have a bearing on security. Don't neglect it. And our final bear trap, and I'm going to touch on this lightly due to shortage of time, it's about unfocused licensing. We are now right on topic, thinking squarely about the licensing clause within the software or SaaS licensing agreement. And the bear trap is for not taking, having a license clause or agreement that fails to take account of all of your operational uses of your software or SaaS. You've got not just one user, but many users, many different types of users, many different contexts for usages, and potentially many different versions of the software that you want to stand up. SaaS is a completely different thing. You don't actually, in a pure sense, have a license for SaaS. What you have is a contract that obliges the supplier to provide the SaaS for you to access, and an authorization for you as an organization and for your users to access your user accounts within that SaaS. Integrations and other practical concerns, such as which of your supply chains or staff types need to access the software or SaaS, are all of whom are third parties outside of your organization, and commercial quotas, such as limits on your number of users or the number of records that you are permitted to manage within your software and SaaS. All of these should be factors that you make sure are strapped down in your license. That's Bear Trap 7. Thank you for listening. I hope that's been helpful, and we're now open for questions.
Thanks very much for that, David. We are running a little bit over time, so we will take, I think, 5 minutes on Q&A. We'll call time at 10:50 if that's okay with everybody. Obviously, if anybody needs to drop off before then we've run over, so that's your prerogative. One of my big fails as a chair when I introduced this session was to say that when you do put a question in the Q&A, was to ask you to not do it anonymously. That's just so that we could do follow-up if we didn't get through all of the questions. So if we don't answer your question and you did ask it anonymously, please, in the feedback at the end, if you still want that question answered, put the question in the feedback so we know it's you and we can answer. So moving swiftly to those questions then, David, one of them, quite a high level question in relation to the distinction between software licensing models and SaaS models, because the distinction is not always clear to the uninitiated. So can you provide some examples of a pure SaaS arrangement with which people might be familiar?
It really depends on the sector that you operate in. I gave at one point in the slide talk, I gave the example of SAP. SAP provides enterprise resource planning applications. Originally, it provided those as conventional software. So you would buy the license, receive the software on a CD-ROM or download it, and then install it on your own servers. Nowadays, SAP provides a product called HANA, H-A-N-A, similar functionality, but it's provided as pure SaaS. That is SaaS. Another application that everyone might be familiar with in the context of CRM is Salesforce. Salesforce is a pure SaaS product, and it's quite an interesting one because it's got an ecosystem of plugins that you can buy or install within the SaaS in order to refine or focus the basic product and deploy it for particular purposes. So, for example, I know of one plugin that takes Salesforce CRM and turns it into a procurement and contract management application, as one example. So those are two examples of pure SaaS. In essence, you access them through the internet browser.
Okay, thank you. Hopefully that's provided some clarity.
Follow up if not.
Yeah, absolutely. Next question. So in a scenario where a customer has a separate software license and a support agreement, what's the position regarding typically the ability to terminate the support service but keep the software license ongoing, particularly when the license originally was granted on a perpetual basis? Is it possible to procure support and maintenance from another provider, not the one that initially provided the solution?
It's an interesting question. It does come down to the specific terms and conditions that have been negotiated. Some canny technology suppliers will include some element of exclusivity in their standard terms and conditions. So the exclusivity provision is designed to prevent you from having the freedom to go and play with alternative suppliers. This very much also comes into my final bear trap 7, concerning rights for your supply chain to access and use the software or SaaS. So it's perfectly common for organizations to have an external help desk provider. So you outsource to appoint contractually a provider that will act as your help desk and be your first port of call for dealing with problems with your technology. You surely need your outsourced help desk provider to be able to at least have a first look at your software in order to see what the problem is before perhaps handing off the problem to the actual software provider as a level 2 help desk task. The question is, did you think about that at the licensing stage? That's the bear trap. You need to make sure that your license takes account of and allows your essential third-party contractors, such as a help desk provider or a hosting service provider, to provide their services and interact with the software or SaaS in order to do that for you. If you've entered into a license contract that prohibits you from doing that or doesn't explicitly include a license allowing you to do that, then you might have a contractual constraint. Ultimately, it is a point for negotiation, but bear in mind that there are risks for a software provider allowing someone else into their software. They know their own product. Your third-party supplier, whoever you might trust or choose, might not. It very much depends upon whether the ultimate software provider, for example, Microsoft, has an international group of partner organizations that it trains in its own products. A more niche provider or a smaller provider of software or SaaS might not have that community of certified and trained partners. So it's difficult for them to trust your third-party supplier, and they will see a third-party supplier providing support maintenance as being a risk to you and to their reputation.
Thank you, David. It is 10 to 11 now. We are 5 minutes over. It won't surprise anybody, I don't think, to know that we do have a long list of questions, which realistically we were never going to be able to get through during this session. So I just repeat what I said at the start of the Q&A session. Apologies for not having asked you to put your name on in the box when you're asking a question. For all of those people whose questions we haven't got to, when you do provide feedback, please do provide that feedback, and please do repeat the question so that we can respond specifically to you. Apologies for cutting off the Q&A so abruptly, but I think we do need to call it quits there. So it only remains for me to say, firstly, thank you very much to David for that really illuminating session. I'm sure everybody has learned loads. I certainly have. It was really, really useful. So thank you. And to everybody who's attended today. For most of the session, we've had well over 300 attendees, which from our perspective is great. It's really encouraging. And from David's perspective, it makes him think that you know, the time and the preparation that goes into this sort of thing is really worthwhile. So thank you all on behalf of all of us. And hopefully we'll see you next time. Look out for invitations to future sessions coming into your inbox anytime soon. Thank you.